Good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I will be moderating this meeting. We will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. However, in order to avoid background noise, I ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking. But when we start taking questions, you can unmute yourself if you would like to ask the question, or you can type it into the chat box. If you have webcams, we welcome you to turn them on so we can make this more interactive. This meeting is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website. And now I'd like to introduce Patrice McCarthy, Deputy Director and General Counsel for CABE.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces and familiar names. We are delighted to partner with CAPS, and I see Fran Rubinowitz is online with us, to bring you a program that West Ed made available to us. Fran and I had the opportunity to listen in when they gave a federal update to our colleagues in New York, and we thought it was very valuable, and we accepted their kind offer to do the same thing for you. I know that things change moment to moment at the federal level these days. So I would just caution everyone, don't shoot the messengers. They're going to give you the best information they have at this moment. But that does not mean that when you listen to the 11 o'clock news tonight, you might hear something completely different. That's the reality we all live in right now. That's the uncertainty that we are dealing with, and we will be resilient and we will be strong. So I will now turn the program over to Sarah Barzee and Alicia Kielmovitch, and I may have mispronounced your name, so you'll take care of that, and give the rest of the time to them. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrice. And hi, everyone, to my former Connecticut colleagues. My name is Sarah Barzee. I'm a Senior Director of State Education Services at West Ed. Alicia will go into a little bit more of an overview of West Ed, but she is really the star of today's show. Nice to see so many familiar faces and names on the screen. Patrice and Fran, thanks so much for the opportunity to share this important information. Alicia is our Director of Policy and Outreach at West Ed. She is located in our Washington, D.C. office, so she has her ear to the ground on everything, as Patrice said, that is developing minute by minute on federal policy and budget. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alicia Kielmovitch and turn the program over to her. Alicia.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you much, Patrice and Fran, for this opportunity. I appreciate, Patrice, you saying don't shoot the messenger, because the message isn't always the best right now in DC. So I appreciate setting that context. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm Alicia Kielmovitch, West Ed's Director of Policy and Outreach. To give a quick background on me, I've been working in the policy space for over 12 years now. I worked on the Hill for U.S. Senator Orrin Hatch. I also worked at the state level for Indiana's State Board of Education, as well as their State Workforce Board. And now I have the honor of working here at West Ed. And just to give you a brief overview of West Ed, I'm sure you probably already know based on Sarah's work and the work we have done with Connecticut through the Region 2 Comprehensive Center. West Ed is a national nonpartisan organization. We are a nonprofit that works in almost all 50 states. We have three buckets of work. The first is research and evaluation. And by that, I mean scientifically valid research. And evaluation is really looking at policies and programs and seeing if they're having their intended outcomes. We also provide professional learning as well as technical assistance and capacity building. So providing access to our content experts like Sarah and others who really understand these issues and what's happening on the ground and how to help improve educational outcomes for students in states and districts. In terms of areas of work, we do almost everything in education except student loans, which I am more and more grateful for, since that is going to be an interesting issue that we can maybe talk about budget reconciliation. But we do everything from early childhood care and learning through K-12. We do some work around post-secondary access, like the TRIO program. We also do a lot of work on career pathways and labor market analysis. We do work on workforce development and adult education. And then we also do some work on educational adjacent areas like juvenile justice, as well as substance abuse, and mental health. Sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this bottom bar so you can see the slides just a bit better. And the computer's not working with me right now. So I'll try to keep going as best I can. So today, as Patrice mentioned, want to provide a update of what's happening here in DC. And there's quite a bit happening. Actually, since the presentation recently that Patrice and Fran were able to join, there's been a whole new bunch of updates from the presidential budget request. Reconciliation is moving again, and we maybe have some info on what's happening currently with funding. So things are moving at a very rapid pace here in DC. So when talking to Congress, there have been really two things that I've heard from staffers that Congress is focused on and working on. The first is appropriations. Appropriations is the annual process through which Congress funds the government. And appropriations really covers only discretionary spending, which is about 30 to 35% of federal spending altogether. Discretionary spending is money that is outside of your entitlement programs. It's money for transportation, for housing, for workforce, for labor, education, anything around NASA, national parks, kind of all the other things you think around about the federal government. They finished fiscal year 2025, the fiscal year we're currently in. They just finished appropriations for that on March 14th. So the government is funded until the end of this fiscal year, which is September 30th, which is when they're supposed to have fiscal year 2026 done. In over the last decade or so, that hasn't really been happening. They haven't really been following the fiscal calendar. So they may have it done by September 30th, or they may extend the timeline, probably closer to the end of the calendar year. At the same time as they're working on appropriations, again, the discretionary side of the House, Congress is also actively working on the budget reconciliation process, which you've probably read a lot about in the news or have heard about. So this focuses on mandatory spending, as well as tax cuts and potentially the debt limit. So mandatory spending, these are programs that, regardless if Congress allocates the money or not, the money's going out because folks are entitled to them through eligibility. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Those three programs alone, plus some other pieces of mandatory funding, that comprises about 60 to 65% of the federal budget every year. Whereas for appropriations, if they don't finish that annually, the government could shut down. With mandatory spending, that money is going out regardless. So if you remember, even if there is a government shutdown, folks still receive their Social Security checks because appropriation, the shutdown is only for discretionary, mandatory funding. It's going out no matter what. So that's what they're really looking at in the budget reconciliation process, as well as extending certain tax cuts, and again, looking at the debt limit potentially. The reason budget reconciliation is such a hot topic is that it only requires a simple majority in the Senate to pass. Most bills in the Senate, including the appropriations bills, need at least 60 votes to overcome the filibuster. And the filibuster is really what decides if that bill is going to advance or if that bill doesn't have a chance. So because for budget reconciliation, there is no filibuster, they only need a simple majority, they can get a lot done through this process, and they don't necessarily have to work as hard on bipartisanship as they need to for other bills. Right now, there are 53 Republicans in the Senate, 47 Democrats, or 47 folks who caucus as Democrats. So in order to get to 60, they have to keep all of their members plus get 7 plus Democrats to, agree with them to advance a bill. On budget reconciliation, they just need 51. So they could even afford to lose a couple of their members and still have this done. So let's talk a bit more about fiscal year 2025, the fiscal year we're currently in, and the appropriations that just occurred. Well, just is relative, I guess, now. It happened over 2 months ago, so relatively recently. So as I mentioned, Fiscal year 2025 was finalized on March 14th. They didn't actually set appropriations. They simply extended fiscal year 2024 funding under what they call a continuing resolution, which means basically they didn't go through the full process. They just, as I mentioned, they just extended the funding to encompass this fiscal year as well. The continuing resolution did increase defense funding, but there were some cuts to non-defense discretionary. So remember thinking of that discretionary pot of money. There's two parts of it, defense, and then basically everything else, which is non-defense discretionary. In education for the non-defense discretionary cuts, it was mainly earmarks, which are, congressionally mandated spending. It's usually around construction projects or other pet projects. They've been phasing out earmarks for a few years now, so that wasn't too big of a shock. So even though there was a slight decrease to non-defense discretionary, no huge changes in the funding levels. Now, where we did see some big changes is in what they call the bill report or the explanatory statement. Usually when appropriations passes or continuing resolution passes, they have what's in the statutory text, and then they have an accompanying bill report that provides more details. So the text itself, the actual statute, is pretty high level. It doesn't give a lot of details. A lot of the details are really in that, again, that accompanying document called the bill report. That's where they'll provide line item details. They'll include explanatory statements, any kind of policy directives or anything else Congress wants to see the administration do with funding, all lives in the bill report. What makes this year unique is that the CR passed without that explanatory statement or without that bill report. So we are lacking a lot of detail that we usually have when it comes to appropriations. Congress has been pretty heavy-handed when telling the administration what they want to spend money on. This year, though, the administration, again, just for fiscal year 2025, the administration has quite a bit of flexibility because that level of detail just wasn't provided by Congress back in March. So let's take a look at this and see how this is playing out actively right now. And there are things, again, it is ongoing. So we're going to talk about kind of three different moving pieces that also impact one another as they are changing themselves. So we have appropriations first. So fiscal year 2025 appropriations. So this money, again, was finalized March 14th, and you have some money that was allocated through statute, and then you have some that was in the bill report. Those details did exist. So the far left column is what is currently happening, what currently is in statute that the administration has to abide by, kind of. We'll talk about that in a sec. What's in the right-hand column in the bill report, that's what really we're referring to the fiscal year 2024 bill report, because there is no bill report for this year. So this is looking at historically what Congress has told the Department of Education to spend money on. That, again, this is the detail we are now lacking. So, for example, Title I Part A, which is the grants that go directly to LEAs. I'm sure you all are very familiar with Title I Part A. That funding was in statute. I believe the department has that money has gone out to states and districts. That money should be in the bank. That's Congress directed it. The administration did it. That 18.4 billion. Where there's flexibility now for the administration is with Title I Part C and D around, migrant education and neglected and delinquent youth, because those details have historically been in the bill report and not in statute. So this funding now is kind of flexible for the administration in terms of how they want to use it or how they want to give it to states to be used. Similarly with special ed, this I think really illustrates the flexibility that the administration has now. So in the statutory text that passed back in March, Congress said $15.4 billion total has to be spent on special education. But now the administration gets to choose how that money is spent on special education. So historically, in the bill report, we've seen, certain funding dedicated to different line items. Now the administration has that flexibility to say, do we want 14.2 billion to go to states? And then we use this money in different ways? Or do we want to give all the money to states? Or do we want to do something completely different? There's again a level of flexibility we just haven't seen in modern times when it comes to appropriations. One thing to keep in mind is that while the money within an account is flexible, so again, they can move money between essentially these line items, they cannot move money between accounts. So for example, they cannot take the 49 million that had been going to Title I Part D and now move it to special ed. That has to stay within Title I programs at some level. Again, how it stays within Title I is what the administration has flexibility with, but they can't move that money to special ed or to CTE or something else. That money has to stay within the account. So let's look at a couple other programs that may be of interest for fiscal year 2025. So what's happening right now? And I will say we have some details from the administration in terms of how they're going to spend this funding, but not all details of how they're going to spend some of the dollars and use some of their flexibility. So again, looking at this column in the right, that's from fiscal year 2024. That's historically the detail we've had that we no longer have. The only detail we have is what's in the left-handed columns in the statute, in the statutory text itself. So looking at school improvement programs, for example, Title I Part B around state assessments is in statute. So in theory, the administration has to spend that money on state assessments, that 380 million. I'll talk a little bit around why I'm saying in theory and in just a sec, but that's money that has to go out to state assessments. Same thing with rural ed or Title V. I saw someone post in the chat about that. And Title IV. I don't know, honestly, if I haven't heard confirmations if Titles 2, 3, 5, 4, 5 have gone out to states and districts. I heard Title 8 has, but we're kind of getting information piecemeal in terms of what the administration is sending out. So again, this is all funding that they have to send to states as directed by Congress, in theory. And you may be asking yourself, well, why is some of this in statute and why has some of this been in the bill report? So why, for example, has, Titles 4 and 5, why are they in statute and Title 2 is in the bill report? Why has that decision been made? And honestly, there hasn't been a whole lot of rhyme or reason behind these decisions. From what I've gathered from talking to folks who have worked on appropriations and budgets much longer than I have, is kind of over the years, certain either members or certain staffers have wanted certain programs in statute and not others. So it's kind of been ad hoc as to what's in statute and what's been in the bill report. I think moving forward, we'll probably see more things in statute, just given, again, the unprecedented level of flexibility this administration has. So we may see the bill report being less consequential moving forward. But to date, it has been, again, where a lot of the detail and a lot of the instruction has been. So for these schools, again, in the right-hand column, that's where the administration has flexibility. And we've already seen them exercise some of that flexibility. So for example, charter schools, historically, in the fiscal year 2024 bill report, was funded at 440 million. They now have flexibility between seed and magnet schools and some other programs. This isn't comprehensive. This is just a high level, but they have some flexibility with that funding. So they've moved funding. They've moved $60 million of funding towards charter school grants. That is now at 500 million. So that's the kind of flexibility that they have and that they're starting to exercise. It's a bit unclear where they took that 60 million from. It's unclear if they took it from seed or magnet schools or something else entirely. But they were able to, again, move money within that innovation and improvement account to have more money now going towards charter school grants versus other programs. So I'll just pause quickly just to see if there are any questions. I feel like I talked a lot at folks, and this can get a little technical and wonky. So I'll just take a quick second to see if anyone, and I'll just stop sharing my screen just in case anyone wants to come off their camera and anyone has a question that or has a clarification that's needed.
Mhm. Alicia, looks like Tom is asking if Title II is safe.
So that is a good question. And the answer is I am not sure, to be very honest. As you can see again, in historically, they have had Title II has had its own line item in the bill report and not in statute. So the administration has flexibility with that 2.2 billion. We haven't seen or heard yet, at least to my knowledge, concretely what they're planning on doing with it. I will say, historically, conservatives in particular, but many folks in Congress have had some concerns around Title II, as well as SEED and the Teacher Quality Partnership grants, as well as the teacher. It was TIF back in my day on the Hill, but it's now Teacher and School Leaders Program. They've had some concerns about those programs because they feel like it's indoctrinating teachers into certain ideology or promoting certain ideology for teachers that then the teachers promote to students in their classrooms. So historically, we have seen, specifically from the House Republicans, that we have seen them propose zeroing those programs out in the past. So it's not out, when the administration started cutting these grants at the start of the year, it wasn't a huge shock because we know again, historically, there have been some concerns. So what does that mean for Title II this year? It's really unclear. And that actually is a great segue to what we're going to talk about next.
Can I ask a follow-up? So
Yes, please.
does that mean that it will hit us in the 25-26 school year or the 26-27?
That's a very good question. So it could hit you for the 25-26 school year if they decide to allocate the funding to Title II as it has been. So essentially maintain the precedent. Um, they could move it to something else. They could take the 2.2 billion and move it to Title IV and say, now you have more money in Title IV. You figure it out. They could do that. They also could potentially ask for that funding to be rescinded. And that's where I'm unsure in terms of saying if is it safe or not. Um, we don't know what's going to be in the rescissions. They haven't been transparent about that yet. We know rescissions are coming. The one that's been talked about the most has been rescinding State Department funding like USAID and NPR, PBS, some of these like culture war topics. We know that package is coming. It should be about 9.8 billion is what we've heard. We haven't heard anything specific in education, but that doesn't mean it's not coming, if that makes sense. Especially for the things that we know they have concerns about, or we know again have already been on the chopping block that they maybe don't want to fund. Um, those are things that could potentially be rescinded. Um, yes, go ahead.
And what about Title III? Because you didn't mention Title III.
So Title III for fiscal year 2025 should go out as
Okay.
is. It's fiscal year 2026 where there's a question mark around Title III.
Okay.
And there's also still a question mark, even if the administration does propose a rescission, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pass Congress. I will say rescissions like budget reconciliation only require a simple majority in the Senate. It's not a 60 vote threshold. So there's a chance that the Senate passes, and there's a chance the House passes a rescission package, but that's not a guarantee. I mean, Congress and the Senate, they have to talk to their constituents. And if their constituents aren't happy with that approach, that's something they have to take into consideration. So we don't know exactly if it's politically viable to rescind some of this funding just yet. That doesn't mean they won't try. And that also means they may not try. So that's where like there's a whole lot of gray in some of the funding decisions that at this point they're not sharing that information, at least with the public. Maybe they're sharing it with Congress. I don't think so based on today's earlier hearing with Secretary McMahon. So maybe Congress has a bit more information than we do, but at this point, it's really unclear if that funding may be rescinded, maybe will be proposed to be rescinded, or if it's going to go out as normal.
I know this is my last question, I promise,
No,
but
please.
are we concerned at all about, and I know it's Department of Agriculture, are we concerned at all about funding for us, our school lunch and breakfast programs?
That's a great question. That is a funding source I haven't been tracking that funding as closely as education and some other funding like the National Science Foundation and DOJ. I will look into that and I will follow up if that works around looking at USDA and school lunches, school breakfast and lunches.
Alicia, I see another question from Jennifer.
Yeah.
Chat. Is that if there is discretion in allocations, is that only between line items within the bill report, or can it be added to what is in statute?
That is a great question as well. It can be added, it can be either. So they could take all of this funding. Again, they may take it all and put it all towards Title IV, for example. Um, Maybe they take it all and put it into Title II, for example. They have a lot of discretion right now, which is, again, really unique because Congress has usually been pretty heavy-handed when telling an administration how they want the money spent. Basically, the only rule is for the programs and the money, they have flexibility, is it just can't go outside of the account. So they can't take, for example, the 2 billion and put it towards Indian education. That's a separate line. But could they move it towards state assessments? Maybe. They have to tell us what they're going to do with that. So there are a couple of options that they have with funding. So again, for the things that are in the statute, they really only have two options. They spend it and allocate it as Congress has told them to, or they withhold the funding altogether, which triggers a different issue, which I'll talk about in just a sec. For those programs that were in the bill report, as you were just talking about, they have more options. They could maintain funding precedent and just say, you know what, this has been enough. It's been a very busy year. Let's focus on 26 and let's just get through 25 and keep things as is. That is an option. They could, as I mentioned, take all the money and just put it towards Title IV and send it as a block grant and say, states and districts, you decide. They could try to do that with fiscal year 2025 funds. They also could fund it and have it aligned to their priorities and ideology. So, they may put some strings attached to Title II that maybe we haven't seen before, if they allocate it, or again, they could withhold it altogether. Agencies have submitted their operating plans. Usually, the operating plans come 45 days after appropriations is finalized. Usually, no one really cares. I'll be honest, no one really cares about the operating plans because we have all the detail from Congress. Like, we know what they're going to spend it on because Congress has told us what they're going to spend it on. This year's different. This year, people were really interested in the operating plans. I don't believe they have been shared with the public. I have not seen those operating plans. I believe they've been shared with at least the majority side of Congress, but there was still some ambiguity even within those plans. Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin today at this hearing with Senator McMahon, or excuse me, Secretary McMahon asked, there was over $300 million that was just TBD, essentially. Maybe it's over 3 billion. I could be getting that one. That does sound better. Actually, 3 billion. That was just like TBD at this point. So I don't know if Congress even has all those details. When it comes to withholding the funding, that's where things get a little tricky, and that's where the rescissions come into effect. So if they decide to withhold the funding, so if they say, you know what, we just fundamentally don't believe in sending out, I'm just going to make this up. I don't know if this is going to happen. We just don't believe in fundamentally sending out CT state grants. We just don't want that to happen. They could try to withhold it. The problem is if they do, and Congress has already said, well, you have to spend $1.4 billion. You can't just not spend it. That's called impoundment. And it triggers a law from the 70s, actually, that started with President Nixon, who tried to do this with I believe, foreign aid, which was withhold funding Congress had allocated. It's that, the administration can't do that in theory. I think this administration may test some of those boundaries. that's where the rescissions come into place, because if they don't want to be accused of impounding the funds, they're going to ask Congress to rescind those so they avoid that. So the thing about rescissions is once a bill goes to Congress and Congress gets it, that funding is frozen. Any unobligated funding is frozen for 45 days while Congress considers the rescission. So for example, again, I'm making this up. I have no evidence that this may or may not happen. And I believe Perkins has already gone out to states and districts. So really this is hypothetical. So if they say, we have this 1.4 billion, you've told us to spend it on CTE, we don't want to spend it on CTE for whatever reason, in order to not impound that funding or not have that funding impounded, they're going to ask Congress, well, can you please rescind that 1.4 billion? And that way we avoid impoundment and we don't have to send the money. So that's where, again, when you ask if Title II is safe, I don't have a concrete answer, because they could ask for it to be rescinded, which essentially would freeze Title II for 45 days. They could send it out as Title II with maybe new strings attached. They could part it as part of an overall block grant and say, well, states and districts, you figure it out. Things are not very clear at this point. So I'll pause again just to see, because again, that's a very technical, wonky information. So I'll pause again just to see if there are any questions or clarifications I can offer.
Alicia, there's a question in the chat from
Yeah.
It's around the timing of fiscal year 25 and the impact on the 2025-26 school year.
Yeah, so I think that's been an ongoing problem, is that all the funding has gone out late or later than usual. It's hard to know if that is because, the department has laid off half of its staff. So it's hard to know if that's just due to little capacity to get some of these things processed. They're still getting positions confirmed and appointed, so that could be, just getting up and running, that it could be going out late because of that. Or they could be making decisions about how they want to, how they want to use the funding, or if they want to use the funding, um, kind of on an ongoing basis. And that could be the delay. Maybe they could still be deciding if is it politically viable for us to ask for this funding to be rescinded or not. So in terms of timing, again, it's hard to know exactly. I think the best advice I could give is expect the unexpected. That what has usually happened in the past probably is not going to happen today. For a variety of reasons. It's again, that's not a great answer, but that's the best information I have at this time. All right, well, let's keep moving forward then. So again, appropriations is one piece of the puzzle, with rescissions as part of it. The other piece, or a different piece, is fiscal 2026 appropriations. And they're starting, even though fiscal year 2025 funding hasn't even gone out altogether, they're already starting on fiscal year 2026. And this is where you're seeing the presidential budget request, and where you're seeing a lot of things either potentially be eliminated or consolidated. I do want to preface that for this slide that this is a proposal. So all of this here on this slide, we don't know if this is going to happen. This is what the administration wants to happen, but it still has to get through Congress, in terms of if it's going to happen. So all of this, again, take this with a bit of salt. Historically, well, it has a presidential budget hasn't been enacted, I want to say, since the early 2000s under W. Bush. So it's unlikely that this is going to be enacted as is. Again, they have to get 60 votes in the Senate. I don't see 7 Democrats at this point voting for this budget. I would be shocked if 7 Democrats did. So it's probably not going to happen as is. I think it is important for us to understand the presidential budget request, because this is telling us some of the priorities for the administration. I think it's also giving us a bit of insight into potential rescissions. Then also, we do know that the House is going to use this as their starting place. So their proposal is going to start with this. So we will see this echoed. at least in Congress, at least in one chamber. So while all of this may not happen, some of it might, which again is not a great answer. It's not a great answer on the likelihood, but that's what's happening at the moment. So digging into the presidential budget just a bit more, they released what they call a skinny budget or a very high level budget early in May. They released the full budget with all the details this past Friday. So this is all relatively new information. But looking at fiscal year 2026, again, this slide is a proposal. It's a wish list. It's not definite. But this is what the administration is asking for. They're asking for about 15.3% of a funding cut to the Department of Education. As you can see, about $12 billion overall. They would maintain Title I Part A funding at 18.4 billion. For most of the K-12 programs, they are requesting that they be consolidated into one block grant at $2 billion. Looking at the 18 programs that they are proposing to be consolidated, it's actually total 6.5 billion right now. So this would be an overall cut to K-12 education of about $4 to $4.5 billion if we were to go to this one consolidated block grant. And on the right-hand side, you can see some of the programs or some of the titles that they have offered to be consolidated into this one block grant. Again, the likelihood of this happening is unknown at this point. So don't look at this and say, well, we're done. We've lost all of Title III. We don't know yet. This is just what the administration is asking Congress to do. So as you can see, basically everything besides Title I Part A would be consolidated. So all the other parts of Title I, Title II, 3, 4, 5, 8, would all be consolidated, into this one potential $2 billion block grant. Charter schools would be maintained as a separate line item. It would be an increase of 60 million, as you can see, to 500 million, which they are doing, as I mentioned, for fiscal year 2025 with their flexibility. They want that to be essentially codified for next year. They would maintain CTE or Perkins funding, or they're asking Congress to maintain it at 1.4 billion. There would be a slight decrease to national activities, but I don't think that would impact district or state funding directly at all. Impact aid would be maintained. They're asking at least for it to be maintained, and they're asking for Indian education to be maintained as is. So you can see again where they want things consolidated. There are also a couple of programs they are asking to be eliminated, such as adult education, which is about $720 million right now. They are asking for that program to be completely eliminated. Preschool development grants potentially eliminated, and then the teacher quality partnerships, they're asking Congress to eliminate those. So again, this is all an ask of Congress. We don't know if this is actually going to happen. It is a possibility, but how much of a possibility at this point, I'm not sure. We'll have to just kind of wait and see what each chamber thinks that they can actually get passed through each chamber, and then they have to negotiate between the two. So again, I'll take a quick pause just to see if folks have any questions. I know it can get to hold like fiscal year 2025 in your head is finalized, but we don't know what's happening because it's flexible. And yet also we're talking about fiscal year 2026 and they're proposing eliminations. It's a lot to hold to have at the same time. And then also rescissions and also budget reconciliation. So I'll just pause and see if there are any questions or clarifications I can offer. All right, great. Well, again, all of these things are influencing one another and yet also moving at the same time. So I think, again, we can look at this list of what they're asking to be consolidated. And if the money hasn't already gone out, they may ask for that to be rescinded for fiscal year 2025. I think, again, this is just me, Alicia. I think we can look at the budget in that kind of relation to rescissions of, okay, they haven't sent out titles 2 and 3 yet. they may, it's not a definite, but they may ask for that funding to be rescinded potentially in the next few months. So that's where I think some of this is helpful just for planning purposes at the local level.
Alicia, there is one question in the chat
Yeah.
from you, Schulman. Even if items, e.g. impact data, are maintained in terms of dollars, could there be ideological strings attached?
Oh, that's a great
You
question.
mentioned earlier, right? A little bit.
Yeah. Yes. Yes is the short answer. So through appropriations, they can do what they call policy writers, which essentially is changing policy through the appropriations process rather than through the authorizing process, which is where policy is supposed to be changed. But because appropriations are must-pass bills, they can they can sometimes slip policy changes uh, into the appropriations process. So yes, that is a definite possibility. Again, it has to be able to pass both the House and the Senate. So whether or not certain policy writers will pass, a chamber or both chambers is really what kind of determines if it's viable. Sometimes, and you may have heard the phrase poison pill, which is a policy writer that they know would just tank the entire bill altogether. So they try not to do those. Sometimes people offer them to to tank the bill. It just kind of depends. But I think that is something we'll have to be very cognizant of when we look at the appropriations bills are, and maybe the bill report, if they're still going to do a bill report, if they're going to put everything into statute now, um, if there are any policy writers and what those policy writers could do. Um, Personally, I think some of those policy writers could codify some of the Doge cuts and reorganization. I don't have any proof of that. It's just me speculating, but I do think it's something we may want to anticipate, especially from the House, is if there could be policy writers around that. But great question. All right, so heading into our last piece around what's next for Congress. Again, it's a lot of money focus. So right now they are working on the one big beautiful bill, as President Trump has called it. Again, that's on mandatory spending. Um, as part of that, they are looking at, it depends on who you ask, if it's a cut or a change, but some changes potentially or cuts potentially to Medicaid, specifically around instituting work requirements and restricting access to Medicaid, even state Medicaid funding for undocumented immigrants. And even documented and even legal immigrants would not be able to access Medicaid funding, either federal or state. And if a state did decide to continue providing Medicaid dollars, even if it's state dollars to Medicaid, to either population, so any immigrant population, the federal government would reduce its contribution to the state for Medicaid dollars. So that could have a significant impact on a variety of states, but really on state budgets. If they say no, we're going to continue to provide access to immigrants to Medicaid, they would then be on the hook essentially for making up that lack of, whatever the contribution is that the federal government doesn't provide. The other pieces of the budget reconciliation that are moving is in the inclusion of a school choice tax credit or school voucher credit or educational choice credit. There's also a huge proposal to restructure student loans. That's why I said up front, WestEd doesn't do student loans, so I don't have a lot of answers on that front. If you do have those questions, I can connect you with the people who do. But I'm not steeped in those details. As I mentioned, we still are expecting 2026 appropriations as we're still anticipating 2025 funding. It's a weird space we're in right now. And the 2026, again, we've already seen a proposal to completely re-examine funding levels in different programs. I think to the earlier question around policy writers to codify some of the changes that we've seen. And then again, alignment with the Trump budget proposal. And then on top of all of this, again, is the potential for rescissions. Um, we don't know yet again, we don't know when, we don't know what, uh, in terms of rescissions, especially when it comes to education. But again, there are things I think ideologically they don't want to fund that to avoid impoundment, they'll ask Congress to rescind. It's not definite. It's just, again, this is just me speculating, and trying to zoom out and read some tea leaves around everything that's been happening. But that is also something that we're expecting potentially to come, rescission bills to come during the summer, maybe even into early September, to again avoid an impoundment fight. So I will stop there. It seems like there are a few more questions maybe in the chat, and open up to see if anyone else has questions. If there's anything else I can clarify or additional information I can provide.
Alicia, no more questions in the chat other than a request for the slide deck, which I believe shared with New York. So we'd be happy to share with Fran and Patrice to get it out to their respective distribution lists.
Absolutely. Happy to share.
And then I also dropped, which you can see, a link to a survey, a feedback survey. Just that's our practice that we always ask for post-event feedback. And then also, as we heard, school lunch, if there's another issue that you're interested in, didn't get addressed, and we can get at that information, please share that as well.
Yeah. So again, if there are any questions, we have 10 minutes or so. Happy to answer them. Happy to provide any clarification. Feel free to post in the chat or come off mute. Also, I think Fran and Patrice have my email as well as Sarah's. So if there is a question you may have and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to ask this in front of an entire group, please email us. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for 12 years. I've heard every question. There is no stupid question when it comes to this. Again, this is a very complicated time in DC with lots of moving parts that influence each other and are simultaneously moving at the same time. So please reach out if you do have a question or you do need any additional expertise or assistance. Please reach out to both of us at any time. Please consider us a resource.
We appreciate that, Alicia. And I think, it's somewhat frustrating because, as you're saying, we just don't have the answers. But I do think it's important for us to be aware of what the possibilities are, especially with 2025. I mean, that's right there, right now.
Yep.
And so it's worrisome. I mean, we've passed our budgets, and this, in fact, could impact very quickly.
Absolutely.
So we appreciate it, and we
Yeah.
hope that you'll keep in touch with us, and we'll keep in touch with you if there are changes that come our way in the next week or 2 weeks.
Or tonight, again.
Or tonight, right.
Things are very fluid right now.
Exactly.
And I want to join Fran in thanking Sarah and Alicia for bringing this program to us. We really appreciate your expertise. It gives us some comfort to know that at least at the state level, by midnight tomorrow, we'll have some degree of certainty, which might last, a couple of months at least.
Yep.
But we appreciate the vigilance that it takes to stay up to date on things the way they're happening in Washington right now.
Absolutely. Well, again, reach out to us at any time. Sarah, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Fran and Patrice, feel free to reach out. We're here as a resource. So thanks, everyone, and good luck with your budget seasons and the state budget, and good luck to all of us on the federal budget.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.